I'm getting close.
Oh, man! That's a missile, dude.
It's a missile.
Can you please respond? One. Line him up!
Out on the freezing waters, the crew of Deadliest Catch just hauled up something that left even the toughest fishermen speechless. A creature out of this world. Captain Jonathan Hillstrand's boat, sitting miles from any shore, was pulling up crab pots when they spotted a glow in the icy waves. Could the seas hold more than we ever imagined? Tune in as we uncover the moment that made seasoned fishermen start shaking like little boys. The catch that changed everything. These fishermen are tough, seasoned, and know the sea better than they know themselves. Most of them have been doing this job for over 45 years. Their hands are rough from years of fighting ropes, and their eyes are sharp, trained to spot anything unusual out on the sea. But no amount of experience could have prepared them for what they would pull up next. Captain Jonathan and his crew had just pulled in a haul of 40 crabs. These were big ones, real money makers. The crew was joking around, talking about what they'd do once they got back home, maybe an early finish to the season. Then something happened that left them speechless. Before we delve into this, it's clear that what they pulled from the depths was far stranger than anything they'd ever encountered. And this won't be the last surprise they face. Jonathan's upbeat mood took a hard turn as their gear got tangled up with another boat's lines. It was chaos. The crew sprang into action. Mike led the way. If they couldn't untangle the gear quickly, they'd risk damaging the equipment or worse, end up with the whole rig in the freezing water. After what felt like hours of back-breaking work, they managed to sort it out. Things calmed down, but the sea wasn't done with them yet. They knew they were racing against the weather. A storm was brewing. Each pot they pulled from the dark ocean was a gamble. Full or empty, this was make or break. As the storm clouds loomed, they steered through False Pass, a place infamous among sailors for being as treacherous as it is narrow. This isn't the kind of place you want to be during a storm, but Jonathan had no choice. They navigated the narrow passage carefully. False Pass is a tiny spot on Unimak Island, southwest Alaska. It's home to maybe 35 people, most of them seasonal workers. Navigating False Pass meant facing some of the biggest, roughest waves you can imagine. This area has a history, a place where sea captains of the past made their fatal mistakes, and Jonathan had no plans to join that list. It was tough, but they pushed through, driven by the thought of a successful season. Once through the pass, they were back to business. They moved deeper into the ocean, around 190 miles northwest of Dutch Harbor, nearing the Pribilof Islands. Captain Jonathan was determined to hit his goal, some 4,000 to 5,000 pounds of crab. That's the dream, $1 million haul, enough to go home with a smile on their faces. The sea, however, always has other plans, and it's never guaranteed that your dream becomes a reality. This job's about survival. Every move, every decision is a risk. The crew pushed through the rough waters. They had one thing on their minds: crabs, as many as they could get. And then came the big moment. They hauled up another pot, and it wasn't just crabs this time. What they pulled up was shocking. Unlike anything they had seen before, amidst the crabs was something metallic, shimmering strangely against the dark seaweed and mud. They couldn't quite make it out at first. It was covered in barnacles twisted up in the lines. The crew stared at it dumbfounded. They pulled it closer, and that's when they realized this was no ordinary catch.
Just got something in the wheel. It's a huge trolley net right here, a huge cod net.
This wasn't some lost fishing gear, nor was it junk from another boat. It looked alien, like something out of a sci-fi movie, a disc-like object, metallic and entirely foreign to them. It wasn't part of their equipment or anything they'd seen before. Captain Jonathan squinted at it, eyes wide. The crew crowded around, speechless. They didn't know what they had just pulled out of the deep, but one thing was clear: this was not what they came for. Whatever it was heavy, and getting it on deck took the combined strength of the entire crew. They struggled and cursed, finally managing to haul it up and lay it on the deck. It was about the size of a small car tire, but dense and metallic with odd markings etched across its surface. The wind howled around them, the sea thrashed, but no one paid attention. All eyes were on the strange object that lay in front of them. What they pulled from the water wasn't just strange, it made them wonder what else could be out there. The crew's uneasy treasure. The mood shifted from excitement to confusion, then to a strange kind of fear. Crab pots were one thing, but this was unknown. It had weird grooves on it, lines that didn't look random. They looked almost like symbols. The crew was whispering to each other, exchanging nervous glances. Jonathan gave the order to secure it, make sure it didn't go overboard, but no one could stop staring. What was this thing, and how did it end up tangled in their gear? The storm was still coming, and they had to focus. They stowed the object away, out of sight but not out of mind. They tried to push it to the back of their thoughts, concentrating on the crab pots still left to pull up. The waves were getting bigger now, the boat rocking harder, but they worked on. Pot after pot came up, full of crabs. The catch was good, really good, but there was an eerie feeling hanging over the boat. When they finally got the last of their gear, Captain Jonathan knew it was time to head back. They had what they needed, a solid haul of golden king crabs, bright red and wriggling, packed into the hold. It was a good haul, but there was still the matter of what lay below deck. Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they'd found wasn't supposed to be there. It was almost like they had stumbled onto something meant to stay hidden beneath the sea. Back at Dutch Harbor, word spread quickly. They had come back with more than crabs. They offloaded their haul, the crew exhausted but still buzzing from their strange discovery. And soon enough, they had people asking questions. What had they pulled up? Was it some old shipwreck, some ancient artifact, or something else entirely? Everyone had their own theory, but no one knew for sure. They were crab fishermen, not scientists, and whatever they had found, well, it wasn't part of their world. Word of their strange find spread far beyond Dutch Harbor. Other fishermen, locals, even reporters showed up, curious to see what the crew had pulled from the deep. The object was kept under wraps, stored in the back of the shipyard, away from prying eyes. Captain Jonathan was protective of it. After all, it was his crew that had found it, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it without answers. Experts were called in, people who claimed they could identify it. Some thought it was a piece of a downed satellite, something that had fallen from the sky and ended up in the ocean. Others suggested it was a part of an old ship, something lost in the Bering Sea long ago. But nothing added up. The markings on the object were unlike anything anyone had seen before. They weren't letters, not from any language they knew, and they weren't just random scratches either. They seemed intentional, deliberate, like they were trying to say something. Days passed, and the question only deepened. The crew went about their business, but they couldn't stop thinking about the strange object. It was all anyone could talk about. Theories ranged from the plausible to the downright bizarre.
Southbound, he's heading to the east side of the gear. Got him on radar.
I don't see him on AIS. I can see you, and I can see him on the radar, but I don't see him on AIS.
Some of the locals were convinced it was something extraterrestrial, a piece of a UFO that had crashed into the ocean. Others thought it was some kind of government experiment, something that wasn't supposed to be found. Captain Jonathan wasn't sure what to believe. He'd seen a lot in his years at sea. Storms that could tear a boat apart, waves as tall as buildings, creatures from the deep that looked like they belonged in a horror movie. But this was different. This was something he couldn't explain, and that made him uneasy. He found himself drawn to the shipyard late at night, standing in front of the object, staring at the strange symbols etched into its surface. It was almost like it was calling to him, like it wanted to be understood. The odd object seemed to have its own power, and as they tried to move on, it started to change everything around them. The object that won't be forgotten. The crew felt it too. They were fishermen, not scientists, but they knew enough to know that this wasn't normal. There was something about the object that made the hair on the back of their necks stand up. It wasn't just the question of what it was the feeling that it was out of place, that it didn't belong. And the more they thought about it, the more they started to wonder if maybe they shouldn't have pulled it from the ocean at all. One night, a storm rolled in. The wind howled through Dutch Harbor, the rain pounding against the tin roofs of the buildings. The crew gathered at the local bar, a place they went to unwind after a long trip. The mood was tense. Everyone was on edge, the strange object weighing heavily on their minds. They talked about what they should do with it. Some thought they should call in more experts, get someone out there who could really figure out what it was. Others weren't so sure. There was a feeling among them that maybe this was something better left alone. Captain Jonathan sat at the bar, staring into his drink. He didn't know what the right answer was. He'd spent his life on the ocean, and he knew better than most that there were things out there that couldn't be explained. The sea was full of things that were best left undisturbed. But now they had this thing, this strange object, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was important, that it mattered somehow. As the storm raged outside, the decision was made. They would keep the object, at least for now. They would keep it safe, keep it hidden, and maybe, just maybe, they'd figure out what it was. The crew left the bar one by one, heading back to their homes, the wind whipping at their jackets. Captain Jonathan was the last to leave. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking out at the dark, stormy night, and then he made his way to the shipyard. The object was still there, covered with a tarp, hidden away from view. Jonathan pulled the tarp back, running his hand over the strange markings. They were smooth, almost polished, and they seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. He didn't know what it was, but he knew one thing for sure: this was not the end of their path. This was just the beginning. Days turned into weeks, and the crew tried to get back to their normal routine. They went out on more trips, caught more crabs, but the strange object was always in the back of their minds. It was like a weight, something they couldn't shake. The question of it gnawed at them, and they found themselves drawn back to the shipyard, back to the object, trying to make sense of it. One day, a man showed up in Dutch Harbor. He was dressed in a suit, out of place among the fishermen and dock workers. He introduced himself as an investigator, someone who was interested in unusual finds. Word had spread farther than they thought, and now people were coming to see the object for themselves. The man asked to see it, and Jonathan, against his better judgment, agreed. They took him to the shipyard, showed him the object. The man examined it closely, his expression unreadable. He didn't say much, just took notes, asked a few questions. Then he left, promising to be in touch. But something about the encounter left Jonathan uneasy. The man had seemed too interested, too eager.
Remember, she didn't say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I cut your gear off." All of a sudden, she's asking for a job on my boat.
It was like he knew more than he was letting on. After that, things started to get strange. There were people watching the shipyard, men in dark cars parked across the street. The crew noticed them, and the feeling of unease grew. It was like they were being followed, like someone was keeping tabs on them. Jonathan knew they had stumbled onto something big, something that was more than they could handle. He started to wonder if maybe they should have just left the object in the ocean where they found it. But it was too late for that now. The object was here, and whatever things it held, they were a part of it now. The crew tried to go about their lives, but the feeling of being watched never went away. They knew they were in over their heads, but there was no turning back. They had found something that wasn't meant to be found, and now they had to deal with the consequences. As the strange find became harder to ignore, they realized keeping it would bring problems they never expected. Letting go of what they found. One night, Jonathan woke to the sound of someone outside his window. He got up, looking out into the darkness, but there was no one there. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever, and he knew they were running out of time. Whatever the object was, it was drawing attention, and not the good kind. He knew they had to figure out what it was before it was too late. The next day, Jonathan gathered the crew. They had a decision to make. They could keep the object, keep trying to figure it out on their own, or they could turn it over to someone else, someone who might know what to do with it. It wasn't an easy decision. The crew was divided. Some wanted to get rid of it, to wash their hands of the whole thing. Others felt like they had a responsibility to see it through, to find out what they had pulled from the deep. In the end, they decided to keep it. They weren't ready to give up, not yet. They moved the object to a safer place, away from the shipyard, away from prying eyes. They knew they were taking a risk, but they couldn't let it go. There was something about it, something that told them it was important. They didn't know what it was, but they knew it mattered. The days that followed were tense. The feeling of being watched never went away, and the crew was on edge. They kept to themselves, kept the object hidden, but they knew it was only a matter of time before someone came looking for it. They had found something that wasn't meant to be found, and now they had to deal with the consequences. Weeks passed, and the crew was starting to lose hope. They had no answers, no idea what the object was or where it had come from. They were tired, worn down by the constant feeling of being watched, the weight of the question they were carrying. But then something happened that changed everything. One night, as they were gathered at the shipyard, the object began to glow. It was faint at first, just a soft light emanating from the symbols etched into its surface. The crew watched in awe as the light grew brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. They didn't know what was happening, but they knew it was important. It was like the object was trying to communicate, to tell them something. The glow lasted for only a few minutes, then faded away, leaving the crew standing in stunned silence. They knew they couldn't keep this to themselves any longer. Whatever the object was, it was alive in some way. It was more than just a piece of metal. It was something far beyond their understanding. Captain Jonathan made the call. They needed help, real help. They couldn't do this on their own. He reached out to the authorities, told them what they had found. It wasn't easy, but he knew it was the right thing to do. They had stumbled onto something that was bigger than them, and it was time to let it go. The next day, a team arrived in Dutch Harbor. They were serious, professional, and they didn't waste any time. They took the object, loaded it onto a truck, and drove away.
Anyway, let these young guys take over for me, and I'll be on an island somewhere.
The crew watched as it disappeared down the road, a strange mix of relief and sadness washing over them. They had found something incredible, something that had changed their lives, and now it was gone. Life slowly returned to normal. The crew went back to fishing, back to the sea they knew so well. But the memory of the object lingered. They talked about it sometimes, late at night when the sea was calm and the stars were bright above them. They wondered where it had come from, what it was, and what would happen to it now. They knew they would probably never get the answers they wanted, but that was okay. They had been a part of something incredible, something that few people would ever experience. Could this out-of-this-world catch be a freak of nature, or is it proof of something hidden beneath the ocean's surface? Share your thoughts and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.